Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, South Carolina, playing host to an Old Dominion team that Dill has snuck up on some Power 4/Power 5 programs in the past. We want to dive into this matchup specifically from a South Carolina standpoint. What are we looking for from this South Carolina team heading into 2024, Dill? I think the mere presence of having LaNorris Sellers at quarterback is inherently very exciting. And for me, as a college football fan, I would imagine for a lot of South Carolina fans as well. Want to get into a few other young names that we're keeping our eyes out for. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And more importantly, these game predictions, the best part about doing it is hearing from you guys, talking ball with y'all in the comment section. So would love to hear how you guys see this game going. Whether you have a pick, a game prediction you want to throw in the comment section. Of course, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, I'll give it to you first here. Let's start with this South Carolina offense. We'll obviously not bury the lead and talk about LaNorris Sellers. What do you want to see from LaNorris Sellers week one against Old Dominion?
I think on a macro level, what I'm looking for is, can this South Carolina team better design this offense around LaNorris Sellers, frankly, to kind of give their offensive line some time to get it rolling. And you kind of look, I think it's a young, really, really talented group. There's a lot of new faces, and frankly, there had to be a lot of new faces. But also even the returners are young guys, true sophomores, true redshirt sophomores, that kind of age. I want to see if they can get LaNorris Sellers moving, keep the pockets moving, and kind of give that offensive line a chance to kind of usher in a better era and use his skill set a little more than Spencer Rattler, who kind of was a pocket passer at the end of the day. They just weren't really built from an offensive line perspective to run that offense.
I think two things are worth noting out. One, the offensive line, we kind of both expect to get better, but I think you made a really good point. You probably want to give South Carolina kind of some time to figure it out on the offensive line. Dill, in 2025 and 2026, this offensive line, I think, can be extremely good, but a lot of these guys are still young, getting their feet wet at the SEC level. And I think you look at Old Dominion, one of the things I love is, look, this is an Old Dominion team that was one of the worst pass rushing defenses that we saw in the country. So it's a relatively good matchup for LaNorris Sellers to come into. And you look at LaNorris, I think you kind of hit it on the head. You look at LaNorris Sellers and say, utilize what this kid can do physically. And I think the best offensive coordinators, really just the best football coaches in general, know how to lean into what their players can do. And you look at LaNorris Sellers, not only is he a phenomenal athlete, Dill, he's a big body. I mean, we're Michigan fans. Go back to J.J. McCarthy last year. We couldn't ask J.J. McCarthy to tote the rock 10 times a game because he just wasn't big enough. Kid was 200 pounds soaking wet. You look at LaNorris Sellers, he's bigger than most linebackers that are trying to tackle him. And so you look at LaNorris Sellers and how we can get him involved, not only getting him outside the pocket, but I think there's an element where you can ask LaNorris Sellers to operate in some design quarterback runs because of the not only athleticism, but the size and physicality he brings to this offense as well.
And I want to see their offense kind of work and maybe not a traditional pocket passing offense. Having said that, in this game, I would really like to see them give LaNorris Sellers some shots to uncork one and kind of show what he can do as a passer. Because you even go back to the spring game, I don't know that we totally got an answer. And that's really the only sample size us as fans really got to look at him. I'm really interested to see what he can do from a passing standpoint, because again, yes, he can run. That doesn't mean he can't throw. I'd really like to see them try to get him some shots downfield and at least make him think, make the rest of the college football landscape think that can be part of the offense, even if it won't be the mainstay, where, again, I would certainly like to see them lean into his ability to run the ball and put defense in conflict in that way.
One of the other things I'll be looking for is the kind of the rushing attack in general, where you go back to South Carolina in 2023, Dill, they averaged 2.8 yards per carry. There's 128th in the country. I think a large part of that had to do with the offensive line, but I don't think the running back play was nearly good enough either. You bring in Rocket Sanders. Everything I read out of fall camp is Rocket Sanders looks like the Rocket Sanders we saw in 2022. And if that's the case, you're getting one of, if not the best running backs in the SEC. Now the question is, what does this offensive line look like? And you kind of get into some players that we're excited to watch. We spent a lot of time talking about LaNorris Sellers. Dill, I think the player that I'm most excited to watch is Josiah Thompson starting at the left tackle spot. Now, he has that OR designation on the depth chart with Tree. Dill, Josiah Thompson, what kind of makes it different from last year's starting Tree at left tackle you kind of just had to throw that kid into the fire because they didn't really have any other options. The fact that Josiah Thompson is potentially starting for South Carolina at that left tackle position, it tells me that he earned it because there are some other options that you could throw out there. He is extremely talented. He put on the adequate weight he needed to operate in the SEC. I think you could get a gem in Josiah Thompson at that left tackle spot as a true freshman.
And I also think, kind of looking at that position battle, frankly, probably the best version of South Carolina's offensive line is having Josiah Thompson play left tackle and Tree Babalade play inside. Because I think Tree Babalade can play SEC level tackle. He's never going to be a great tackle. I wouldn't say he's not that premier athlete. He's got the size, he's got the strength, but he doesn't move the way Josiah Thompson. He's not built the way Josiah Thompson's built. I frankly think if they can get Josiah Thompson rolling, and I'd really like to see kind of how they do that in this game and see where they're kind of at, if Josiah Thompson does get to take some real snaps, if you will. Because at the end of the day, if they can get those two on the field at the same time, I think that certainly goes a long way in getting South Carolina.
I thought the same thing. I think they're probably starting him at left tackle because you want to just make sure Josiah Thompson is going to be okay at left tackle as a true freshman. If Josiah Thompson comes out here, plays good football, I'm very interested to see if they kick Tree inside because I think we both see it the same way. This kid is built to play in a phone booth. You talk about physically overwhelming opposing defensive linemen. That's Tree. I think he could be a great guard, and I think he's probably one of the best 5 offensive linemen on this football team. I'm going to be really curious to see how they continue to find the best 5 starting offensive linemen throughout the first couple of weeks of the season.
And then the other guy is Cason Henry. I think he is a fascinating one because you just haven't seen him be able to be healthy, but you kind of saw in the spring game. I mean, he moves the way you want your tackles to move, and we haven't really been able to say that about a lot of South Carolina tackles in the past where everything felt like it was cobbling. Okay, this guy is probably more of a guard, but we don't really have any option. He's playing tackle for us. I'm kind of looking. I think you're starting to see South Carolina, and again, hopefully Henry can stay healthy. I really do think he's got the potential to be an interesting right tackle because I thought in that spring game he had some good reps against some really, really interesting pass rushers like Stewart and Kennard.
Quick question here. Like, what happens if South Carolina's offensive line takes a massive step? Like, I think this team was so much better than a lot of the national media gives it credit for because that offensive line struggled so much. Like, if this offensive line takes a step, and I get you lose Spencer Rattler, you lose a guy like Xavier Legette, I think this team can be overall a little bit better. Last thing I want to talk about on offense, Dylan, and I'll kind of go through this one quick, the wide receiver room. I've kind of had some hot takes in the past that said, I think South Carolina's pass catch room gets better heading into 2024. And I think that would make a lot of people scratch their head saying, all right, you lose your best wide receiver by far in Xavier Legette. How do they get better? They're more complete. I mean, I think they got a lot of different guys that can do some different things. Last year was Xavier Legette or bust. Like, there just wasn't any other pass catchers that were really that productive or explosive for South Carolina. Now you got a handful of different guys, and Amari Huggins-Bruce transferring out, that's a good sign for South Carolina. I mean, I think we know what Amari Huggins-Bruce is. We know he's a solid power 4 wide receiver, and the fact that he's transferring because he's not going to get adequate play time, what does that tell you about Nick Harbor or Mazeo Bennett or a guy like Vandarius Jacobs coming from Florida State or some of the transfers that you picked up in the portal? I think it tells you that these wide receivers might be a little bit better than we all thought they were heading into 2024. So
and I'd really like to see them have more wide receiver play that can work in space and make things happen after they catch. Because obviously, when Juice Wells went down, you didn't really feel like you had that guy. And I think that's an important part of the Shane Beamer offense. I think that helps LaNorris Sellers a lot as he kind of develops and takes over as the starting quarterback. So that's one skill set I'm really hoping to see in this game. That at least they kind of possess more than they had last year.
Quickly on the defense, I don't think Old Dominion really has the juice to challenge South Carolina secondary. So you might be looking at that cornerback battle, but I think the South Carolina secondary is going to be just fine. I don't know if there's going to be massive conclusions that we can take from South Carolina's defensive back group. That being said, Dill, Old Dominion gave up 13.8% of sacks on the dropbacks. I didn't say that stat right. I'm going to go with it again. 13.8% of the time the quarterback dropped back last year, he was sacked. That was 133rd in the country. They were brutal protecting the passer. what is the number one thing that we've talked about for South Carolina heading into 2024 is the pass rush, specifically at that edge rusher position. When you look on the inside, Tonka, TJ Sanders, Alex Hunley, hey, they were the only guys that were really contributing in the pass rush. You go to 2024, there's a handful of guys that I want to see kind of turn it up, pin their ears back, and go get after the quarterback, I think, headlined by true freshman Dylan Stewart, who had such an impressive spring game, and then he's just kind of carrying that momentum to fall camp. I know he's listed in the 3 deep right now to start the 2024 season. If there was one guy I would bet my money on, is going to, I think he leads the South Carolina defense in sacks. I cannot wait to see him on Saturday night getting after the quarterback here.
I know there's so many guys on defense I'm excited about. Dylan Stewart, obviously kind of the guy because he feels like the hope for this defensive line, at least to kind of take that next step. And I'm a Kyle Kennard fan, like what Gilbert Edmond can bring. But Dylan Stewart ultimately does have a different gear than I think anyone else on this unit. To me, I'm looking at Demetrius Knight. I think he's the guy to me when I think about what I want to see from this defense. I want to see linebackers who look more comfortable in space. I felt like last year that was a huge problem, being able to tackle in space, being able to cover in space. Bam Knight is an interesting one. I'm really excited to see how that battle plays out, but also, frankly, to see if they can get those three on the field together along with Debo Williams, because I think, again, you kind of look at those two guys, both very comfortable.
I don't know if I'm going to be banging the table to take that nickel position off the field, though.
That's definitely a fair point. So I probably shouldn't say that. You can't take Jalen.
Hey, it's good to have 3 good linebackers because they only had 1, well, maybe 2 last year, but they were playing Stone Blanton, who you kind of talk about. You want to see linebackers tackle better in space. Like Stone Blanton not being on this football team is certainly going to help that. I think what kind of boils it down here is that I'm very excited for some of this young talent that I think can really be, kind of the heartbeat of the South Carolina team, kind of take over the South Carolina program heading into 2024. Now, I'll kick it to you for a take here. South Carolina Old Dominion line sitting at 21 points. This is more of a game for me as a college football fan that I'm just more interested to watch for South Carolina. Who we taking, though?
I mean, I'm a little surprised it's not a little higher. I mean, Old Dominion, they have played scrappy in the past, as you kind of mentioned right on the outset. They've played teams tight that, well, I don't think they're close to Virginia Tech, but they go play them tight last year. We've seen in the past. I still think people are sleeping on South Carolina just because, again, they look at some of the guys they lost.
Agreed.
Really kind of consider how, frankly, close they were. I mean, that's a team that probably beats Clemson if they have a decent offensive line.
I was going to say, if South Carolina had let's just go with average offensive line. Didn't have to be good, just average. I think they're certainly a bowl team, and they probably win maybe 7 games, maybe even 8. I mean, Spencer Rattler was great, but he just didn't really have the opportunity to maximize his talents because of the offensive line protection. If this offensive line gets better, yes, they lose Spencer Rattler, lose Xavier Legette. I still think they're going to be a really good football team. I'll take the 21 points too. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.